Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first meeting for 2021, which is a special council meeting of the council for January 2021. My name is Councillor Margaret Thomas, and as Mayor, I will be chairing this meeting. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on this evening and share this message from the elders. Kaya kaya broodiers, Marman and Yoks, Nuna de Mort, Nitchakul and Nulamaya Kalamunda Budja, Yayi, Nunjurapan, Wadulas Kulan, Jina, Nuna da Nitcha, Nunga Budja, Nunga Broodiers Kura, Yayi, Burda Burda, Kedalak, Burda, Kaya, Yunga. Hello, welcome to our leaders, men and women who have come to our place today, this evening, and I'm happy to see you all standing on Noongar land of their leaders past, present and future. Thank you. The operations of Council and the agenda for this meeting are governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, standing orders and rules of conduct. All matters of business listed in the agenda will be dealt with as separate decisions of Council. Thank you for your attendance and interest. Acting CEO, are there any apologies or leave of absence previously approved?
Through the Chair, we've received an apology from Councillor Brooke O'Donnell.
Thank you. We don't have any questions for public question time, and we have 2 deputations, so I would like to invite Mr. Peter Forrest to come forward and give his deputation. And Happy New Year to you, Mr. Forrest.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors, members of public observing and city staff in attendance. My name for the record is Peter Forrest of 36 Panoramic Terrace, Kalamunda. I refer to item 81.1.3 on this agenda and the substantial attached papers that are a submission. The city staff are seeking permission of council to send to the Planning Commission. It refers to an updated draft of State Planning Policy 4.2 that has, to current date, been in operation since August 2010. As in the attached paper 8.1.3.5, entitled Key Changes, those are fairly summarised by city staff. The updated draft policy explains objectives and components of policies likely to be used by the Planning Commission to assess future plans for activity centres. There's no particular compulsion for local authorities to make a submission, and this draft has been open for any individual or group of the community to offer comments since August 2020 until it closes on the 12th of February shortly. City staff have kindly copied in full the extensive documentation supplied by the Department of Planning and Planning Commission for councillors and community to read and hopefully interpret in relation to our Kalamunda localities. That reading task for councillors, I must say at short notice, is challenging in itself. However, the proposed submission is prepared only from the view of city-employed statutory planning staff whose perspectives are inevitably limited to their detailed knowledge of existing and former statutory constraints that, although useful, are essentially broad-based and retrospective and not encompassing community views. And that limitation of expertise amongst city staff was presumably the main reason why an activity centre plan for Kalamunda town was prepared at a cost to ratepayers of over $250,000 to employ external consultants during 2018 and 19, concluding with a future so-called activity plan for Kalamunda township set out in over 600 pages that has proved, in the opinion of the local community, to be virtually worthless, completely failing to consider the evolving economic scale and movement realities of Kalamunda and the safe walkable access that was clearly spelled out in both the previously applicable State Planning Policy 4.2 and again in this draft. update. Therefore, Council, in very briefly agreeing to submit that activity centre plan for Kalamunda Town to Planning Commission in late March 2020, can hardly be surprised that it has not been accepted. Yet sadly, that submission is still being used by city staff as guidance for other ongoing projects, and city staff have also used it in comments to councillors as though it actually is relevant. Yet the town of Kalamunda continues to progressively shrink, with numerous empty premises and declining retail economic activity. Furthermore, a highly relevant petition directly to council from 230 residents all living locally who use this town centre daily and strongly supported by retail operators seeking safe walkable pedestrian access, which is in accordance with State Planning Policy 4.2, was on the advice of city staff, noted by council, and then since then has been deliberately ignored, even though it is the concept is in accordance with State Planning Policy 4.2. Today, this proposed largely bland submission before you, seeking council support has not sought any local community input or broader range of non-statutory expertise, and is largely a token gesture. Likely only to draw attention to previous futures planning failure in the case of Kalamunda Town Centre. The copious city notes include comments to again apparently further justify to council what the community recognised as a costly failed venture. These comments to you reflect the obvious frustration of the Kalamunda Town community, that's my comments to you, that no useful, relevant, creative future planning is being done to at least halt the obvious economic decline of the Kalamunda Town Centre. In contrast, it's worth noting that the most useful and significant successful initiatives in Kalamunda have been those actually initiated by the community. For instance, the artisan markets by Rotary, farmers markets and Friday night markets by Chamber of Commerce, the adult learning centre self-education by community sharing of interests, curiosities and talents, and very recently communal social activity by seniors seeking to return to the Jack Healy Centre, that's the Darling Range Seniors Group. So as a few councillors may already be aware, Kalamunda Town residents, including many retailers and property owners, are now so dismayed with city forward planning that they're embarking on a self-help initiative by way of a voluntary team effort, short to be assembled and called Future Focus Kalamunda, that will be a realistic forward-looking communal think tank and will hopefully also include intergenerational participation. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Forrest. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Forrest? Or questions to our officers? I have a question. I would like to ask our Director of Development Services to make a comment on a couple of those comments made by Mr. Forrest.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your deputation, Mr. Forrest. I'll make a few comments in relation to the deputation that you've made. One of those is that the submission was coordinated by the City's Strategic Planning Department, and comments were sought from the various departments within the City's team, so it wasn't just prepared from a statutory or strategic planning perspective. There was comments sought from the various departments within the City. Secondly, the state planning policy forms part of the state government's planning framework and is open to the broader public across Western Australia and Australia, or any other interested parties, to make submissions. It's not a document that the City would necessarily advocate on behalf of the state government for submissions to be called upon. That's the role of the state government in terms of seeking public comment on their document. With regards to the initiatives that you've spoken about that were driven by the community, many of those initiatives that you mentioned were events and form part of placemaking and part of temporary events that occur in a period of time. The Kalamunda Activity Centre plan is seeking to upgrade the city's urban environment and provide a framework and a formalised urban environment for those events to flourish and continue to operate within.
Thank you, and thank you for coming to speak to us, Mr. Forrest. I would now like to call on Mr. David Downing, who would like to give a deputation on 8.1.4.
Good evening, David Downing, 107 Milner Road, High Wycombe. I'll be very brief. Amendment 105, item 814. In 2018, Amendment 88 was initiated by the City. Included was a clarification of the factors used in the contribution calculation formula that had been in use since the beginning of the scheme. There were 16 landowner submissions attached to the amendment. None of these 16 submissions objected to the continued use of the existing formula with the clarification of the factors. Amendment 105 is essentially a reversal of Amendment 88 with the removal of those factors and a subsequent change to the method of calculating contributions. There are no landowner submissions attached to this report that support this latest change. Despite there being no landowners supporting this amendment, the City continues to pursue this change. Thank you.
Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Downing or for our officers? Director of Development Services, do you wish to make any comments?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for your deputation, Mr. Downing. Amendment 88 at the time reflected the way that the City had operated the DCP to that point in time. A significant event occurred with a review of the contribution plan report and the infrastructure items within it. The utility service estimates at that point in time were comprehensively reviewed, and there was a significant drop in the estimates related to utility cost estimates. That brought to light issue with the City's formula that was detailed further within Amendment 88 and sought the City down a process of seeking advices to ensure that the DCP was operating in an orderly and proper manner. Those advices have resulted in the City revising the Development Contribution Plan report and seeking to achieve fairness and equity, the highest levels of fairness and equity within the contribution arrangement. And Amendment 105 has been pursued to make clear within the City's local planning scheme the fair and equitable manner that the contribution plan should operate. So I just wanted to provide clarification in response to the comments you made in your deputation.
Thank you for coming to speak to us, Mr. Downing. We now move on to announcements by the member of presiding without discussion. And Councillor John Giardina would like to make a statement, so I'll go to Councillor Giardina.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's to do with the disclosure of interest. More to the point, interested in partiality, Madam Mayor and councillors. I wish to place on the public record that I will from tonight more closely consider whether I need to disclose interest and impartiality, impartiality interest in matters before council for decision. I have recently undertaken training provided by WELGA and Local Government Association with respect to the disclosure of interests, and as a result I now more fully understand the principles of the various interests that I may have and be required to disclose. End of statement.
Thank you very much. We may need to close the meeting should councillors wish to ask any questions about the confidential part. Otherwise, we will just do the reports. Acting CEO, are there any disclosure of interests?
Through the Chair, I've received no disclosures of interest.
Thank you. Councillors, with your indulgence, I would like to change the order of the reports to Council tonight because we have Mr Dennis McLeod from McLeod's Barristers and Solicitors here. Welcome, Mr McLeod, who is here to answer any questions councillors may have on 8.1.4. So I would like to do that first, and then we'll go to 8.1.3 so that we do both of those together, and then we'll go to the tenders as we may wish to close the meeting. So if we could go to 8.1.4, which is on page 25. Do councillors have any questions? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wasn't aware we were going to change the order, and so if I ask a question and Mr McLeod is to respond, is that going to be happening in an open forum, or? No, you have to close it. That's...
Yes. Oh, well, no, we need to close the meeting. So you wish to ask a question regarding legal advice?
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move to go behind closed doors.
I'll just go back and...
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
You'd
likely, yes.
You'd like to go behind closed doors?
Yes.
So we have a mover, Councillor Giardina. Or do we have a seconder, Councillor Sewell? All those in favour? Thank you. We'll go behind closed doors. Thank you. We'll just wait for a minute. Favour? Thank you. Councillors, we now go to the report, which is on the officer recommendation, which is on page 33. Is there a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor Stallard, and seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Is there going to be any debate?
A question?
Question? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you. Just to the Director about in the event, because it talked about the scheme, landowners having a relationship or an interim payment relationship until the end of 23. In the event that a landowner wants to seek a final payment and agreement to get out of the scheme, is there any mechanism to do so, and what might that look like?
Through the Chair, thank you for your question, Councillor O'Connor. There is provision within clause 6.5 of the city's local planning scheme for landowners to seek from the city by agreement, to ascertain a final cost contribution. Given that this arrangement has been in place for some time, a majority of the infrastructure under the arrangement has actually been constructed. So there is a significant amount of certainty behind a significant portion of the contribution rate. The balance does have significant designs progressed. The balance that has yet to be constructed does have significant designs progressed, and those designs are at a standard at the moment of about 85%. Should a landowner seek to have a final cost contribution ascertained with the city, there would be scope based on the remaining infrastructure for a final cost contribution to be ascertained. Some additional contingency may be included within that final cost contribution rate to account for any possible variations through a construction contract, and to take the risk out in terms of what shortfall there may be once that infrastructure item has been constructed based on those final cost contributions. But there certainly is scope based on the designs and the amount of infrastructure that's been delivered for the city to enter into an agreement for a final cost contribution in accordance with the clause 6.5 of the city's local planning scheme.
Follow-up question, quick one.
Follow-up question.
So when might that information or the terms of such an agreement be known to the council or the residents?
Through the Chair, I did mention that should a landowner wish to seek a final cost contribution, they can approach the city now and seek that, and there's scope for us to determine a final cost contribution. And enter into an agreement in accordance with the clause 6.5 and of the city's local planning scheme. There would be a process where we would liaise with our engineering department to ensure that there is appropriate contingency applied in determining that final cost contribution rate. Given the questions raised by yourself in the submissions, in the next review of the contribution plan report, I'd be comfortable with outlining some parameters and making that clear within the contribution plan report for how a landowner may approach the city and what kind of criteria would sit behind a final cost contribution rate in terms of the remaining infrastructure that's yet to be constructed. I'd be happy to do that in the next annual review.
Great, thank you.
We have a mover and a seconder. Is there going to be any debate? If not, I'll put the motion on page 33. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And thank you, Mr McLeod, for coming to answer our questions. Councillors, To allow Mr. Forrest to leave if he wishes, I would like to go to 8.1.3, which is on page 19. Are there any questions that we don't need to go behind closed doors for, or do you wish to ask questions that we do? Are there any questions? If not, I'll go to the officer recommendation on page 24. Do we have a mover for that? Councillor Jardina, seconded by Councillor Billich. Is there going to be any debate? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And now we'll go back to 8.1.1. I'm sorry to juggle this around, but it was to try and be helpful. So again, councillors, if you wish to ask questions about the confidential items, we need to go behind closed doors. If you wish to ask questions that aren't confidential, please let me know. Are there any questions on 8.1.1? If not, I'll go to the officer recommendation on page 12. Is there a mover? Councillor Jardina, seconded by Councillor Ritchie. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. 8.1.2. Are there any questions? Councillor Sewell, is this a confidential question? So you wish to move that we go behind closed doors? Is there a seconder? Councillor Boyd. All those in favour? Thank you. So we are now behind closed doors. We'll just wait a minute. Now resume the meeting, and the officer recommendation is on page 18. We'll just wait 1 minute. I think we're ready to go. Is there a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor Sewell, and seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much for an excellent meeting, and we now declare this meeting closed at 7:15 p.m.